Dante's Divine Comedy, the Inferno, Cantos 6, 7, and 8. I just wish to recall 3 points about the Divine Comedy. As you would have noticed in the second circle of the Inferno, the circle of the lustful, Dante encounters, at the entrance of the circle, he encounters Minos, who apparently is the one who determines which level of hell the soul of a damned person would go to. And we are going to see more people like Minos, more creatures, one would say. We'll find Cerberus, which we will see in the beginning of Cantos 6, as Dante and Virgil enter into the third circle. And then there will also be eventually many, many creatures from classical mythology, harpies, gorgons, centaurs, and so on. And this is one of those things about the Divine Comedy, that is the presence of figures or creatures from classical mythology that have convinced a majority of readers that the whole work is purely fictional, because these figures or creatures from classical mythology do not actually exist. But then again, it must be said that the authenticity of the work depends very much on Dante's perspective of truth. For Dante, truth was not just within Christianity. For Dante, like any cultured person of the Middle Ages of his time, there were also glimpses and shadows of truth in other cultures as well, particularly Greek and Roman culture. And Dante had the clarity of mind to perceive that and to blend it in with his own understanding of moral truth in the Commedia as well. So when he mentions people like centaurs, gorgons, Cerberus, harpies, and all these exotic creatures from classical mythology, we have to realize that he's trying to convey to us, in depicting these creatures, he is trying to convey to us a certain moral truth. And he had no other means of conveying to us a knowledge, understanding, and insight into those moral truths, which at first may appear somewhat abstract, even though it may be something experiential. But nevertheless, in order, even if it has been experienced, it's still, there is a difficulty in communicating that experience to others unless one uses concrete images, which is what Dante is doing here throughout the whole Inferno, and also throughout the rest of the Commedia as well. So when we encounter together with him these strange, bizarre looking creatures, we have to realize that they represent something. Dante puts them in hell precisely for a reason, not to give a description of a fantasy world, but to tell us something about these creatures, which can be an extension of the human psyche as well, one could say. And secondly, therefore, it must be said that the hell which Dante is describing here, although it is what we Christians call the eschatological hell, that is the hell as all Christians believe it to be, the place where souls are damned for all eternity. Yet Dante uses a description of this eschatological hell to portray the psychological hell that people go through if they find themselves, or if they belong to any one of the category of vices Dante is describing here. And when therefore he talks about a particular character or personality whom he names as well, one must not take it for granted literally that such a person is in hell now. No. For example, in the last canto, we saw Francesca and Paolo de Rimini and many others as besides, and whom you also meet in the cantos that are to come. When Dante puts them in hell, says that they are in hell, it does not mean that they are really there in hell, but he puts them there in hell to give us an understanding of this very important truth that such and such a person in hell and eventually in purgatory and in the paradiso as well is an epitomization of a way of thinking and feeling and behaving, a way of being human that may be wrong, bad, on the one hand, that may be also good, upright, praiseworthy on the other hand. And maybe there's something in between as well, a situation or condition of life whereby one is in a state of transition from bad to good, from vice to virtue, and so on. So the characters that are mentioned here, who are actually historically real life characters, are there in the Commedia, not because Dante has seen them there, but Dante puts them there, how shall I say, for the sake of literature, to simply present that character as a kind of epitome of a certain way of life, which we need to consider, because there is no other way of understanding the meaning of a particular situation or way of life other than seeing it characterized concretely in a particular person. Thirdly, one must also say something about the so-called punishments that Dante describes in the Inferno. Now, he differs very much from Catholic theologians of his time, who simply say that the hell is a place of fire. Every soul in hell, everyone who is damned to hell, suffers burning. But Dante says that Dante describes various kinds and categories of punishment that exclude burning. As we have seen, Francesca and Paolo de Rimini are constantly tossed about on a whirlwind, never being able to touch ground. And in the cantos that I shall be presenting in this podcast, there are other forms of punishment that do not involve fire as well. Now, when he describes these so-called punishments in open inverted commas, we must not take them literally as well. What he's trying to say to us is the outward description, outward concrete description of that punishment is only a reflection of the inward psychological torment that a person who is addicted to that particular vice is actually suffering deep within himself. The early commentators of the Commedia call each punishment described by Dante in the Inferno as a contrapasso, a counter step, one can say, meaning to say one thinks that one is actually stepping forward, but actually one is stepping backward, moving backward. So also for the sinner or the person who is indulging or behaving or living according to a particular vice or vices, he may think that he is enjoying himself, that he has found something to fill up his desire and longing for fulfillment. But when he goes deeper within himself, he sees that it is not so. Just as we saw in the circle of the lustful, people who surrender themselves to lustful desire think that they have found it, so to speak. But at the end of the day, when all the glamour and romance and the veneer of pleasure are peeled away, there is simply suffering, cynicism, rancor, malice, and just this languid, aimless wandering about. So also when we talk about the punishments described by Dante here in the Inferno, very simply the punishment, he describes it as such simply because the punishment is actually the sin itself, the vice itself, the essence of the vice itself. Finally, when one comes down to that level, one sees the sin for what it really is. The sin of lust in the second circle of hell is that, engaging themselves without any restraint on the part of conscience or reason. Those who surrender themselves to the sin of lust will always be tormented by this aimless languor, not able to arrive at that fulfillment that they're actually looking for. They'll always be missing it. And we'll see also in the other circles of hell, the punishment that Dante describes must not be taken literally as something that's really happening in hell now. Maybe, yes, of course. I suppose, I believe that those who committed such sins and refuse to repent of them in hell, they are perpetually regretting the sin because they are actually suffering the effects and the essence of the sin itself. Without more further ado, I'll just go elaborate on what has been said so far about the contrapasso. So after moving away from the second circle, Dante and Virgil come into the third circle, which is the circle of the gluttonous, those who are there and who are being punished for the sin of gluttony. And what he sees here in this circle are souls of those who have been addicted to gluttony in their lives. They are suffering in two ways. First of all, they are wallowing in the mire, in a kind of muck, so to speak, very filthy, very dirty, and they are sodden. And the second punishment is simply they are forever being pelted by a torrential downpour that is a combination of rain, of hail, and of ice. So it's a very graphic picture here, but what Dante is telling us is that those who commit the sin of gluttony will suffer in these two ways as well. And when we look at this idea of these gluttonous spirits wallowing in the mire, in the muck here, in the end of the day, when we look at it, that's what happens to people who surrender themselves to unrestrained indulgence in excessive eating. The excess food that they have taken into their system ends up being toxic. It ends up being cancerous. It's like the mire. It's like the mud. It's like the filthy, sordid slime that these souls are wallowing in. The filth and the filth of it all is simply an image of the poison that the excess of food that one has taken in is turning into when it's not digested or when it's not converted into energy. It just stays somewhere along the metabolism, and unless it is purged, it stays on and it becomes corrupt, it becomes bad, it becomes it soon takes on certain virus and bacteria. It turns into something toxic, something cancerous, which eventually vitiates the whole metabolism and leads to illness, which can be even fatal. And then the other form of punishment, the constant pelting by a torrential downpour of rain, of snow, and of hail or ice represents the relentless goading on of the impulse to overindulge oneself in food. And the image of the rain, the hail, and the ice constantly pelting these spirits is an image of that. The goading, the instinctive or impulsive wanting to eat more of something, which one initially eats and finds it delicious. But the more delicious it is, the more the person wants of it, until the point when he should know that he should stop, but he finds the appetite for it increasing. The more delicious it is, the more he eats, the more delicious it is, the more he wants of it. And there seems to be no end, no restraint. It's more and more and more and more and more. And that is the meaning of the image of being pelted by the torrential downpour of rain, of hail, and of ice. It's relentless. Some people just go on and on, eating and eating and not stopping, binging, as one says. And the punishment of gluttony is that once one abandons all restraint, one will constantly be at the mercy of all this goading appetite to eat more and more and more and not to stop. And it's cold, as we all know, those who have had the experience of coming under a downpour like that, even though one is well covered with Macintosh and raincoats and so on, you can still feel the cold. It's not a very comfortable feeling. And if eventually one gets wet, it's even worse. And one has to get dry as soon as possible. Otherwise, one catches a cold. But the coldness of the whole thing represents simply the merciless goading on of the appetites. Once one gives in to the appetite to want to eat more and more and go beyond the limit, there is no stopping at all. There's mercy. When Dante describes of how cold it is, he's talking about how merciless it is. When one is merciful, one experiences warmth. When one is not merciful, one is merciless, ruthless, then one experiences the cold. And eventually from this circle of hell, the Virgil and Dante proceed to the fourth circle, where they find those who were either spendthrifts or who were misers in their life, two opposite extremes. One hoards, the other one spends without limit. And here they find Dante sees these spirits walking around the whole circle in opposite directions with a heavy load on their chest. And that heavy load is the punishment itself of miserliness. And the miser is punished by his own, by the fact that he is a miser. Because when one is a miser, one is insecure, one is anxious. The more money one hoards, the more fear there is that it may be lost, that one may steal it. There is the anxiety, there is the concern of how to invest that money in order to have more. And there's that perpetual constant harassment of worry, of anxiety, of fear. And it's all like a heavy weight that weighs on the heart, on the mind, and the heart of the miser. The miser is his own punishment in that sense. He will never rest. He will never have a moment's peace, because he will be constantly tormented by the thought of fear of losing his money, by the anxiety of how to make that money increase and to gain more, to find ways of getting more and more money. Now, we can understand if the miser is punished in that way, we can understand why he's punished by having all that fear, worry, anxiety weigh him down, his mind and his heart. But when you think of the spendthrift, how can the spendthrift be punished by carrying a weight? The spendthrift, as we all know, is very carefree. He doesn't care. He just spends, he just lavishes his money. He's completely extravagant. He's completely extravagant. He doesn't care. It doesn't matter how much a thing may cost. He just gives the money. Not a care in the world. And we all know spendthrifts are irresponsible in that sense. And I think Dante describes them as being punished by having a weight on their chest, because they themselves, spendthrifts, become a weight on others. Eventually, when they have spent all the money they have nothing else, then they have to rely and depend on others for survival, on sustenance. They have no more money, and they can't find the means to have to earn the money, and therefore they have to rely on public charity, social welfare, and other forms of surviving. And this can be a weight on others who may already have other responsibilities, more heavy and more serious responsibilities to provide for their own dependence. And then when they see that this person who is a relative or maybe even a stranger and who has nothing after having spent all that he has, and yet he needs something to survive, and the person who has will have to provide something from what he has, which sometimes may not be enough. So in that sense, the spendthrift can be a weight, a burden. His whole being may be a burden on others, whom he will have to rely on for financial and material support. In that sense, that's the circle of the spendthrift and the misers. Then Dante comes to the fifth circle, which is the circle of the wrathful. Here he comes to the second river of hell. We remember that to get to hell itself, he had to cross the first river, Akron, which literally means cheerless, the river of no joy. Here he comes to the second river, the river Styx, which is actually a marsh, a swamp. And here he sees spirits being punished for having been angry, for having given in to angry moods in their lives. It may not be a violent form of anger. We will find him describing those who had a very violent form of anger, whose anger drove them to do violent things, punished further down in the Inferno. But this is the kind of anger which is not violent, but it's the smoldering, sullen kind of anger deep within. And the spirits who are being punished here are submerged in this swamp, and there is darkness all around. And this punishment also reflects and is a very graphic description, I would say, of a person who gives in to sullen, smoldering moods of anger, who lets the anger with him, who nurses that anger within him and lets it grow and lets it affect his whole way of thinking, his whole way of seeing things, his whole way of behaving. Sullen, gloomy, cheerless, pessimistic. And these are all represented by the ambience of this circle of hell in the river Styx. Like the spirits who are either submerged or even some are just floating on the marsh. Maybe for them, they are not that sullen, they are not that gloomy, they are not given in to sullen, gloomy moods, but there are those who are deep down, and this is a very accurate description, so to speak, of people who give into sullen moods. They are completely absorbed. They are blinded by their anger, by their gloom, which is dark, and they can't see beauty, goodness, moral goodness in others. They can't recognize, they can't identify, they can't appreciate the goodness that are in others, simply because their sullenness has come down upon them, not just like a cloud, but it is almost as if they are completely absorbed in that sullenness and gloominess, as someone who is being sinking into a swamp. And here Dante also meets a character, Guido Argenti. It's quite amusing, hilarious incident, if there is anything hilarious in hell, because this character here in the fifth circle, Filippo Argenti, yes, was somehow responsible for Dante's family being impoverished. Guido himself had been a Ghibelline, whereas Dante's family had been Guelph. And there was a situation in this troubled history of Florence, the conflict between Guelphs and Ghibellines. The Ghibellines were those who wanted to have greater independence in the government of Florence, whereas the Guelphs themselves were more inclined to ally themselves with the Pope. But there was a situation, just give me a moment. Yes, apparently, according to the note given by Mendelbaum, someone from Filippo Argenti's family at one stage had met Dante in the streets of Florence one day, and because of the antipathy, the antagonism between the two factions, this member of Filippo Argenti's family had just slapped Dante, just like that. And of course, Dante did not retaliate, but deep within himself, he harbored that resentment and a certain vengefulness, which comes out in this incident here in the fifth circle in the river Styx, where he talks about Filippo Argenti emerging from the marsh, identifying himself, and Dante, all of a sudden, that pent-up resentment and anger that he had thought had gone, but which was deep down within him, surfaced. And it's quite amusing. Here he is in the circle of the wrathful, and here he himself experiences wrath. He says, he talks about himself wanting to thump Filippo d'Argenti back into the river Styx. Just one point I forgot to mention before I finish. In the fourth circle, the circle of the spendthrifts and the misers who are being punished, as Virgil and Dante emerge from that circle into the fifth circle, all of a sudden Virgil begins to give a discourse on fortune, and it's not it's somewhat strange, because in the Middle Ages, there was this belief in fortune as a kind of, one could say, deity. No, not in the Middle Ages, but in classical antiquity. Fortune was the deity who determined a person's lot in life, and who can also determine a change of that person's lot in life. Of course, in the Middle Ages, everyone being Christian, believing in God as actually the one who determines one's lot in life and who can even change one's lot in life, somehow or other, people in the Middle Ages continued to believe in fortune, but no longer as a deity, but as a minister, as an agent of God, who, acting on behalf of God, determines one's lot in life, and also determines the change of one's lot in life. And there you have this belief in the wheel of fortune throughout the Middle Ages. No one can be sure that he will always remain in that same condition in his life. As the Roman writer Boethius talks about fortune in his work on the Consolation of Philosophy. One may be a king today, but the next he becomes a beggar, because fortune is constantly turning a wheel. And every time fortune turns the wheel, someone's lot in life changes, for the better or for the worse. And you begin to wonder, why is he giving a discourse on fortune, which is hardly a Christian theme? But the point of it, especially in the context of the fourth circle of hell, Virgil, or Dante puts it in the mouth of Virgil, wants to tell us, when you consider the fate of the misers and the spendthrifts, we ourselves too must admonish ourselves and take it to heart that nothing in life is certain. We cannot afford to be complacent. We cannot be too confident that we can be safe where we are. Those who have really experienced life will know that. There were moments of destitution, and then that passed, and one found oneself in a situation where one is provided for. Then conversely, there are other situations where one has everything, but then something happens and he loses everything. So the lesson that Virgil's discourse gives us, and we have to learn from Virgil's discourse, and at the same time, added to that, considering the fate of the misers and the spendthrifts, we too, whatever lot we have in life, we have to realize it unless we are careful, unless we practice moderation and detachment, no matter how good or no matter how bad it is, unless we practice a certain moderation and detachment, we will be caught unawares when that situation changes. So the purpose of that discourse is that. I will continue again with Canto 9 the next time.